Too often I've watched companies kind of trip over their own feet because actually they've got a great product market fit, but they can't figure out the internals.
One of the things that I've really tried to develop is being comfortable taking decisions where you don't have all the information. You will very rarely have all the information to take a decision, and you have to make a judgment call. And I think that sometimes the power internally is having that vulnerability to say, actually, we did take a decision there, we got it wrong, I got it wrong, this is what we learned from it, and we move on. And
everything seemed rosy and bright. But then 2022, there were a couple of things for me that I found very hard over the last few years. One is the loss of a co-founder, which I didn't deal with that well. Single biggest piece of advice, if you don't have the distribution channels worked out early, you will struggle. It doesn't matter how good you are at your job. If you don't think about distribution, you will have a very tough time with it.
hello, and welcome to another episode of the Power of People Building podcast. My name is Mark Chaffee, and I am the co-founder and CEO at HackerJob, and I am your host for today. And today we have a very, very special guest because I was just chatting with him before we hit record, and I first met this individual at the back end of November 2014. So almost our 9-year anniversary. And I'm of course talking about Matt Bradburn. Matt is the founder and CEO of the People Collective, a modern people operations consultancy that helps startups, scale-ups, and PE-backed companies grow with simple, stage-appropriate solutions to complex scaling problems. And Matt's got some very exciting news that we'll be chatting through today, as he's recently joined forces with the team over at Seed. Matt has over 10 years of experience in the recruitment and technology industries and has got a fascinating journey from recruitment to founder and the roles in between, which we'll certainly dive into. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark. And yeah, I can't believe almost a decade. A decade. Think about that for a second.
Honestly, me too. When I tell people how long we've been doing HackerJob, I'm like, wait, basically my entire working life has just been this one company, and you were right at the start of that journey, so it's super fun to do that. So I'm sure a lot of the listeners will know who Matt Bradburn is, given your very vocal LinkedIn presence and success throughout your career. But for those that don't, why don't you give us the 2-minute story on how did you get started into recruitment and the journey you've been on since?
Oh, the start into recruitment. So, I mean, that's always a good story, right? So, having graduated in 2008, there was a financial crisis. It appeared, and having wanted to take a grad scheme up in marketing, and having gotten that grad scheme and having it ripped away from me, I decided to go and do a master's, as any sensible person would. Before graduating in 2009, when there was still a financial crisis. And, quite frankly, what jobs were available right then? Well, basically, you could be an estate agent or you could be a recruiter. Having walked the streets, handing my CV into every single estate agent in the Battersea Clapham region, and quite frankly, I probably could have done better, actually getting a job there, but there we go. I ended up working for a friend of my mother's friend, in a storage unit in the Battersea Self-Store. If you've ever taken a train out of Victoria, you'll know it. It's big, it's large, that's where I started my career. There were 5 of us sat in a storage unit, hiring software engineers.
To say the most common phrase when people talk about their journey into recruitment is that they fell into it. I think that might be the all-time great falling into recruitment story. Your mother's friends, storage unit in Victoria, software engineers, let's go.
It was the classic, right? You know, the interview, sell me this pen, at which point I proceeded to go and sell this person a pen and why they should buy the pen without ever asking, what do you want in a pen? But failed the interview, got the job.
There we go. We've all been there, that's for sure. And talk us through your journey from there. Obviously, you had a very, very successful in-house recruitment career. You were the founder of the most important community I think that's ever been created in the internal recruitment world, and then transitioned into a full-time founder as well. So yeah, talk us through the roles in between then and now.
I mean, it's been a fun journey, right? So, started in agency recruitment as many do. And actually, I learned a huge amount, particularly in this first couple of roles around understanding the motivations of people, like why they want to have, certain roles, what they're doing in terms of, getting their opportunities in terms of the tech industry and the industry itself. I think those are two things that are clear to separate in my career, like my fascination with people and their development, and my fascination with startups and their development as well. I remember going to Ocado's first warehouse in that job, and having conference calls with Mike Lynch at Autonomy. Hopefully he's not being extradited yet. I mean, it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating time to be working in tech, because you had all these kind of nascent, now kind of powerhouse businesses, or not so much, coming through at that time, and it was a real opportunity to understand and learn about the industry as well as about people. So I spent my time there and another agency kind of building and developing and understanding like what makes roles fascinating people, what engineers want out of jobs when they're working in businesses. And I think that was something that's kind of continued throughout my career before moving, as you said, in-house, and taking a first role at a company called Qubit. And actually, again, that's also a role that influenced a lot in terms of my career. Watching this almost cult-like culture get built within this organization. Like I've never worked at a company since, or even seen a company since, that had this like cultish approach to, we are going to be successful. And watching the leadership, actually, look, they did good things, they did bad things. Many of those were through trial, error, whatever. But frankly, it was an experience, and it's been really fascinating to see how many ex-Qubit people have gone on to found their own businesses, and also how many of them keep in touch as well. I think more so than any other company. So yeah, a nice one. I then joined List, worked there, helping grow them, and then VP of People at Peakon. God rest its soul. Now it's part of Workday. Sorry, Workday, but no one in People loves Workday. But yeah, before starting the People Collective. So yeah, as you say, kind of moved to a position where I was then founding my own company and building a huge amount of empathy with founders along the way, as well as really thinking about how can we build exceptional businesses through people. And I think that's the fundamental thing that I learned with Qubit, is that if you get the people side of things right, if you hire exceptionally motivated people where you focus on the behaviors as much as the skill and the knowledge, then you can lead to very successful outcomes. But yeah, that's the truncated journey.
And there's so many threads that we could pull on in that journey, because there's been so many interesting parts. But I think watching from afar, something that's always been very apparent to me, and you touched on this, is that as a talent acquisition leader, you've always had this very people-focused approach. And how do you build high-performing teams? How do you retain great individuals, rather than just the like acquisition of talent and the employer branding piece? And that kind of obviously culminated in the People Collective. So for those that aren't familiar with the People Collective, what was kind of the urge to go and be a founder and start it? And what problem did you see that you were trying to solve?
I think there are kind of two or three strands that led to me starting it, right? I think the first one is, during my time, both in talent acquisition and in people, I learned that actually I was much more motivated by watching people develop and grow throughout an organization than just hiring exceptional people in. It was not just, I brought this brilliant person into the business. It was, what has that person gone on to do? Wow, like they've been promoted twice in 12 months. They've done this, they've built this. Like everyone is absolutely ecstatic with the impact that they've had in the company. And watching those people become successful, was kind of the first strand. The second was very much like, I've also worked at companies where we've made mistakes. I've made mistakes within the people team, on the talent team. Founders have made mistakes, other leaders have made mistakes. And I've learnt, again, that getting the people foundations done right and done early makes a huge difference to the exponential kind of potential outcomes of the business as a whole. And too often I've watched companies kind of trip over their own feet because actually they've got a great product market fit, but they can't figure out the internals. They don't treat the internal building of the business like a product. And actually, very kind of prescient. Went to a talk today with Job from remote.com, and he was talking about exactly this. He built his entire business like a product, all about constant iteration, testing and learning, and thinking about how we can be very deliberate about building an organization as opposed to building to a default. And I think the third reason I started People Collective, look, it is hard being a VP of people, head of people, director of people. Like, there is a lot of emotional burden, and I wanted to have the impact that I had across as many businesses as possible without some of that emotional burden, quite frankly. And it's not an easy thing to say, because a lot of people do that job and they do it so well. And quite frankly, I took myself out to an extent, but it is something that I wanted to do because I felt it could improve the lives of folks who were leading in those businesses, and I could support and elevate those folks without having to take on some of that burden myself.
Yeah, I think one of the concepts I think I might have heard from you first, or certainly somebody within our space, is this concept of people debts. We're so familiar with technical debts. We spend so much of our time trying to hire, retain technical people, and as you build a technical product, I know the amount of times we've rebuilt our product, you end up with technical debt. That's an inevitability. Maybe talk to the challenges that these scale-ups have with people debt when they think about so much of this operations or this internal systems too late from a people perspective.
I mean, it's so true, right? And the analogy is pretty similar. So if you're building a technical system, it's a strategic lever you can pull on, which is, do we want to move a bit faster? Yes, that's fine. We'll deal with the technical debt later, like the communication challenges, the kind of knowledge base that comes with that, and having to essentially pay it down at some point. And the same is true with I'd almost term it organizational debt now instead of people debt, although I kind of tried to coin that phrase around people debt in 2017, 2018. Like, I think organizational debt is more an effective view of it right now, because it kind of spreads across the business. It's not just the people side. It's like all of your processes and practices, and you're like, yeah, we want to move quickly. But what I've learned is that if you get to a point where you are moving so fast that you're just ignoring this stuff, you're just growing by default, then actually by the time you hit 200, 400, 600 people, my Lord, you got a problem. It's like having a gigantic wet spaghetti ball and trying to untangle it. Like, who wants that? No one wants that. But this is where these businesses get to, because you're trying to pull at these different threads, trying to untangle and work out, like, actually, does this work? Does this work? Should we put this piece here or put this piece here? And they're so interlinked through the ways of working, the communication, the relationships, the politics, that it becomes much more painful to solve that problem of 400 people than to actually get the things right at 40 people. And therefore, I'm a huge advocate of thinking and building a company deliberately step by step through this idea of kind of minimum viable process, which is like, what do you actually need at this stage? Like, don't worry about this, that you can deal down the line, but these 2 or 3 things, yeah, fix these now and get a basic version of it working, and then build upon it as you grow the business.
Something that you touched on earlier, and as a founder, I certainly know that I make so many mistakes. I made one today and called it out on all hands, the whole company, like, oops, sorry guys, that one's on me. And you talk to the kind of qubit cult-like culture, and some of that being really positive and some of it not. How has your empathy for founders, understanding for founders changed as you've gone on that journey and kind of become a founder yourself?
I mean, it's night and day. I think when you're heading up talent acquisition, there's a lot you can end up getting a lot of frustration with founders. Why do you not see things this way? Why do you not think about things this way? Same in people roles, like why do we have this misalignment or miscommunication? But actually, I think it's because I wasn't doing my job well enough back then. And having now started a company and had to make some really tough decisions at times, my empathy is now much greater. And I think it's given me an opportunity to get a viewpoint as to like, okay, I get it. Founders do have to make some really tough calls at times, and they don't always have all the information, but they have to make a decision and they have to keep moving forward. And that's, whether that's VC backed or bootstrapped, it really, it matters little, right? But VC is just like that on steroids. But in that case, like, it's meant that my empathy's grown much deeper because, quite frankly, it's not an easy role. A lot of founders that I speak with, they do feel very alone. There are very few people who are able to empathize with them and the decisions that they have to make, be that on their team, be that other people in other jobs, because, they're friends who work in corporates. Like my best friend, he works in, massive property company, and he's like, I don't know these problems. I don't recognize any of these, right? Even their spouses, like, it's hard. And actually, it's been amazing, like, through the tough times, just how much when you actually speak to other founders, they're like, yes, I recognize absolutely everything you've just talked about. Keep talking, talk to me. And yeah, it's something which, I'm not sitting here being like, get out the world's tiniest violin for all the founders in the world. But at the same time, they're often much maligned in the press and other places. And actually, a lot of them are just doing their best given the circumstances.
Obviously, as a founder, I'm completely biased and entirely agree. But I think you hit on a few really interesting points of what it's like to be a founder. And one of the things that I've really tried to develop is this being comfortable taking decisions where you don't have all the information. You will very rarely have all the information to take a decision, and you have to make a judgment call. And I think that sometimes the power internally is having that vulnerability to say, actually, we did take a decision there. We got it wrong. I got it wrong. This is what we learned from it, and we move on. And if you as a leader can be vulnerable, it kind of empowers your team to be vulnerable. And you wrote a brilliant LinkedIn post this morning. We're recording on October the 4th. I don't know exactly when this is going to come out, but about a vulnerable update on your life over the last 3 years. And I think everybody in our world has had a very tumultuous 3 years, whether it be COVID, rifts, lockdowns, work from home, etc. So I love the article and would love for you to talk through that vulnerability on your journey over the last 3 years.
I mean, it's like a roller coaster, but I mean, it's like all the roller coasters at Alton Towers combined together into just one horrendous mess, right? I mean, we've had some really good times, like 2021. What a wonderful year where everything seemed bright and breezy. Cool. Would you like some more business, sir? Yes, please. Like, okay, wonderful, great. Off we go. More clients than we could deal with, having to grow the team, etc. Everything seemed rosy and bright. Even in COVID times, like, companies were dealing with challenges, and we were kind of working with them to help them solve the kind of remote working piece. But then 2022, I mean, yes, I posted the thing this morning. Like, there were a couple of things for me that I found very hard over the last few years. One is the loss of a co-founder, which I didn't deal with that well. Like, but I didn't realize that I hadn't dealt with it well until way too late. And that in itself impacted my further decision making, which led to me to go, let's make a SaaS business and try and raise a bunch of money. At the perfect precipice of 2022's downturn within tech, which was quite frankly an unfortunate situation, a terrible idea. But as you say, like you don't have all the information at the time. This idea of compensation tech was really just starting to kick off. Like figures had just raised. Ravio hadn't raised when we were raising, and basically it ended up being a Ravio versus us situation. And they went with Ravio, and I'm like, I get it. Like these guys have huge experience building an amazing product, in terms of their experience at Deliveroo and whatnot. So, yeah, like you can't know everything. You do sometimes make decisions which hurt you, the business, people around you. And yeah, I mean that one hurts. That one still smarts to this day. But I mean, that's not going to change anytime soon. But I think people, you can't as a founder, you can't shy away from making these decisions. You have to go with the information that's available. And the information that was available at the time was there's still money available at seed. Yes, this is a hot space. Yes, we were booking plenty of calls with VCs to raise. Did we go about it the right way? No. Did we raise? No. Did it fall flat on its face? Yes. Have I learned a hell of a lot about it? Absolutely. But, I'm still here, still alive.
And I said this to you before I started recording today, is that sometimes the cockroach strategy is the strategy. Just survive long enough and you'll get opportunities along the way. And I feel like, we've certainly done that particularly well at HackerJob. But it's been a challenging year or couple of years. You talk through the mistakes. We've made a ton of mistakes. I've made a ton of mistakes over the last few years. But it's culminated in this incredibly exciting announcement that I kind of touched on in the intro with Seed. So for those that aren't aware, give us an update on the news that got announced, I think 2 weeks ago now, and what is this very exciting acquisition and vision moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, so Seed were actually our second client ever at the People Collective. So I knew Matt and Johnny, the two founders of Seed, the two guys that were running the business. I'd helped them with a variety of kind of people challenges early on in their own development back in Jan 2019. And stayed in touch ever since. And it was kind of one of those that every 4-6 months we'd go to the pub or whatever, have some drinks, have some chat over building services businesses and talking about, what's working, what's not working, share ideas with each other. And it would always kind of come back to, well, I keep getting asked who are the best, embedded recruiters. And they were like, well, I keep getting asked about these people problems. Like maybe we should bring these businesses together. And what it took was a massive tech downturn for us to realize that this would actually be a very sensible idea right now. So back end of last year, I think, you get this combination of factors, which I'm happy to go into more because I think that they're quite interesting, right? We're in this situation where the tech world hasn't just been hit like crazy. It's also the talent and the people world. And happy to go into that because it played a massive role in the reasoning for bringing these two things together right now.
Yeah, I would love to. So I think the thing that I'm really interested in, and maybe this is where you want to go, if not, feel free to take it somewhere else, is in the last 3 years, we have seen the ultimate boom and bust of talent. So, lockdown happened in March 2020, recruiters furloughed instantly. One of the first people out of the business go on furlough. Then this raw comes back, and I think there was a moment where it was harder to hire a tech recruiter than it was a software engineer.
100%. The software engineer, the recruiter salaries, when I ironically started this piece of CompTech, recruiter salaries going through the roof.
And then we get into the downturn of kind of 22 and kind of led by big tech, all of these big rifts, which people and talent are massively impacted. And I know Google just did another one not too long ago that massively impacted people and talent. And so I've had a lot of conversations with people around, is there going to be a different way that people and talent functions are built? Are there incredible consultancies out there like Seed and the People Collective that are going to come and plug that? So we'd just love to hear your view on the state of play of talent as a profession and this boom and bust cycle that we seem to have, and how does that impact the thinking of this kind of merger that you guys are doing?
I think firstly, agree. We're going to see a massive change. Companies, it hurts on so many levels. It hurts the people, it hurts the business. If I'm being cynical, it hurts their reputation. when they have to make these big rifts, right? So I foresee growth in 2024 quite positively across the US and the UK in terms of tech. It wouldn't surprise me if that was the kind of flavor of the year, was actually we're growing back again. But I think we're going to build these gigantic talent teams again? No. Do I think we're going to build gigantic people teams again? No. I think what we are seeing is two things. Again, both of these kind of came together through quite elongated discussions with Matt, which is to make it simple, a reliance on external provisions. Fundamentally, the risk then sits with the external provider because they're the employer, right? Like it's a no-brainer for companies because they're not taking on the long-term risk of employing those people, but they can go to the service providers externally, utilize, the level of capability and the level of service and the numerical clout, frankly, of those teams to be able to go and build whatever, internal project, product, whatever teams that they're trying to create, right? So I think that's one thing. And I think, again, from the people side, you're also getting this in the terms of like, yes, we want to expand our people team, but we want to do so in a way which really serves the business. So less about the people partnering, more about the people outcomes. You've got a slightly different flavor of change there. So the talent team is about like pure numbers. Let's shift that externally. The people team is about like, how do we make this way more commercial? So how do we actually deliver really clear impact? Jessica Swan has written a brilliant book about kind of building people as a product, and we've actually turned this into a bit of a course. And we have a very shared view there around actually, this is where you will see talent and people teams merge back like they used to do in 2014, frankly, oddly. When you had more of these kind of well-rounded groups where you'd actually go and solve problems across the organization with these kind of different cross functions coming together. We've ended up in the situation where you have like talent, onboarding, L&D, reward, etc. Like everything is siloed. And I think you're going to see much more of these two things coming together. So those two themes of external support and then internally having much more of a unified function where everybody, even those recruiters, for example, when they're not hiring, and you know as well as I that fundamentally hiring comes in waves, right? Like no one is just doing this constantly, or except in 2021, that very, very random year. But right, it comes in waves. So in those downturns of waves, I think you're going to see talent team folks have an opportunity to work with people teams on specific problems or challenges or outcomes that they're trying to achieve within the organization, instead of just letting them go or do nothing. So I think it's a real opportunity for the functions. And I think it's an opportunity that obviously works well for us and Seed to kind of partner at the same time to be that external support when they need it. So I really rambled there.
No, I love it. And I love it because I've just sat in this position. We just hired a director of people into our business, and we're now 140 odd people, multi-geo, and there was lots of flavors that we could have hired in a director of people. But the one that we really leaned into was this people outcomes. And I think what's fascinating about what's happening in the startup and scaled up space is I don't think that it's only the people teams that aren't going to get massively scaled anymore. I generally think these businesses are going to be much leaner than what they've ever been. And I know that in our board meetings, I'm getting grilled on, you have to do more with less, you have to do more with less. All of the top podcasts I listen to is, what's your burn multiple? How are you doing more with less? How are you doing more with less? And I think we're going to go through this era of actually and this isn't, this is a very well coined phrase at this point, but it's all about, efficient growth. If 21 was growth at all costs, now it's about efficient growth. And how the people team, how the kind of task that I've given our director of people is when you're a 20, 30, 40 person startup, you kind of know what everyone's doing, the high performers, it's super easy. Actually, when you get to 150 people, Dunbar's number, you don't know everyone in the business anymore. And you do need to start building this, like, how do we consciously build a high performing culture? How do we consciously do performance reviews that is consistent across the business? And it's a terrifying thing as a founder. I'm like, I have no idea, bluntly, how we're going to do this, right? And so I'm so sold on this merge of what you guys are doing, and I think it's going to be a really exciting time for you guys.
I mean, it's funny, right? Like, I was waiting for you to use one of the two phrases, high performance culture or talent density. Yes, all one out the bag there. I mean, yeah, look, you got, and I think those are the two buzzwords at the moment, frankly, which is how do we build a high performing culture and how do we maintain talent density within an organization? And I think when you're talking about high performance culture, it's become fairly buzzwordy pretty quickly within the people space. But what people mean is fundamentally how do we do more with less? I still see people teams putting their output metric as do an engagement survey. I'm like, no, that's not your output metric. That's terrible output. That's your input metric at best. Like, let's gather some data. But let's start thinking as people teams in a really commercial way. Let's work out, like, ideally what's our profit per head. Probably more like revenue per head in many of the companies that we know. But let's start thinking about how we actually build high performance organizations, fostering cultures where there's a lot of open communication, really clear expectation setting from above, where people have an understanding of what career pathways look like, and they are rewarded for their development and growth. And that performance isn't seen as a dirty word, which it has been for quite a long time, right? In this era of beanbags and faffing about, like this idea of like, oh, performance, it's like, oh no, we don't like performance management, and you're like, well, now you kind of gotta. So it's been very fascinating watching as well. Like, a lot of people in companies are actually buying into that more than I would think.
And I think it's amazing how quickly companies are buying into it. And I don't, it's always outside in, and we need to be careful not to comment too much. But I think Mark Zuckerberg and Meta's maybe the most interesting example here. He refused to do riffs forever. He was just like, we don't do riffs. It's not who we are. It's not what we do. And now has gone, actually, we need to get so much leaner as an organization. And it's amazing. You put out ARR per employee, something that's a metric we're all reporting on. When in 2021, nobody was reporting on ARR per employee. Like, God, no, we were reporting on employee headcount and how that was the great metric that was going up and to the right. So,
well, I mean, like, that was my reporting back in 2018 to the board. Like, the headline metric was employee growth. Like, and that was their requested, because I asked. I said, what's the headline metric you want? Employee growth. I was like, cool, all right. But if you just can't get away with that now. Like, and nor should you. And I agree. I think that over the next decade, you will see much better businesses built, and we have, we live in a country where economic growth has stagnated for years, and actually, I think you will see more efficient economic growth in many companies because of this.
I entirely agree with that. As what I wanted to say was that, it's been a challenging few years, and there's been a lot of restructures and rifts, and like, it's been really brutal, and we've had to go through it. Pretty much everyone's had to go through it. It's been really tough. But I'm absolutely a fan of this era of efficient growth. It feels way more like actually building a business rather than the Kool-Aid of tech sometimes, which is like this crazy vanity, especially in the venture-backed world that you kind of live in, which is like, wait, this isn't really building companies at the end of the day, which is something that I've really enjoyed as this journey. So, Matt, I'm conscious we're coming up to time. I want to get your sense on 2024. You touched on, you think it's going to be a good year. There's going to be some growth, which is awesome. I'm not asking for some macro prediction. Don't worry. I guess just more, this is a really exciting announcement in our industry, this kind of coming together of the People Collective and Seed. What is it that's really exciting you as you partner with Matt and the team as you look towards next year?
Do you know what? There's a couple of things. A couple of them are personal, a couple of them are professional, I guess. I think personal level, like when you're a founder, like sometimes it's actually hard to learn, which sounds like, oh, that's a really arrogant thing to say. But it's not. Like you're learning constantly about all these different bits and pieces. But you're not, when you're a solo founder, you don't have that person to bounce off day to day, like what approach should we take with our strategy to this? And that is, fundamentally from a personal level, it's been the best thing. Like being able to sit there with Matt and Johnny and be like, cool, what should we do here? And actually learn so much from them already. I mean, yeah, we announced it a couple of weeks ago, but it was done in June. And already I'm like, they've transformed everything, like our sales process, our approach to marketing, etc. I'm like, yeah, fair play, guys. Like, I am learning a lot again, which I'm loving. I think then professionally, like the opportunity within the next year is really big for us to really think about, right, actually, a lot of people have these problems together. It's talent problems and people problems. They're not separate problems. They are the same problems. One leads to the other. How do we build our headcount plan? How do we execute our headcount plan? How do we, how much should we pay this potential income employee? How much should we pay these people who are already here? How should we think about career growth? How should we advertise the fact that we do career growth externally? Right, like they're all dualities. And it's the opportunity to take that to companies and be like, you don't have to deal with 5 different providers or 2 different providers or 3 different providers. You've got one space, one person that you can deal with who will help you navigate these challenges. And our team is so aggressively focused on doing a great job. It's a mantra that I've always heard internally, which is, if you don't look back at the work you did a year ago and feel disappointed, then you haven't learnt enough. And I think that if I'm being really honest as a founder, I probably didn't develop in a year, and that was bad. Whereas my team did, like they kept on growing and growing and growing. And now I feel like I'm back at that stage where I'm able to look back and be like, yeah, we're growing again.
I love that example. And I think it's the best thing about being a founder is when we closed our Series B earlier this year, I remember sitting in a meeting room in our office in London with our VP of Finance and saying, I'm deeply unqualified to do my job again. And that's like this amazing feeling of like, and only really a founder's allowed to say that, of like, okay, wait, I've got no experience in this next phase, which means you're going to go on this phenomenal growth trajectory. I think that you have to be very humble. You have to have that growth mindset. You have to, hold your hands up, as we've talked about, when you own those mistakes. But it is an amazing feeling as a founder. I think a bit of a privilege, bluntly, that we are able to do that. But Matt, you're going to have to come back for round 2 because there's so much we haven't touched on. We didn't even get to DBR, which was such an important part of our industry. So we will have to come back and do this again. But there is one closing question we like asking all of our guests, which I'm going to give you 2 variations of, because you sit in this position of having worked in TA, worked in people, but being a founder. So we like to ask people, what is the best piece of advice you've received in your career? But I will give you an alternative, and I'll let you choose which one. There are a lot of very entrepreneurial people in our space. Luke Coleman is one of my all-time favorite people. He's currently working on a contract for us. He's just set up a new business. If you had to give people in our space advice to move into a founder, what advice would you give them? So I'll let you choose career advice or advice for people in the recruitment, talent, people world moving into being a founder.
I will probably go for the latter, but you do realize I've worked with Luke before and have nothing but admiration. One of the best recruiters out there. I would say moving, and actually this is kind of prescient, right? Like I get a lot of people who are like, I want to be a solo recruiter. Or I want to be a consultant and I'm just going to go out on my own and I'm going to do people roles. Single biggest piece of advice, if you don't have the distribution channels worked out early, you will struggle. It doesn't matter how good you are at your job. If you don't think about distribution, you will have a very tough time of it, which is really like negative way of framing it. So I'll put it the other way. If you are really good at distribution, you will absolutely nail your opportunity into moving into that space. But that for me is critical these days more than it was in the past. You have to have a great product, but you also have to know what channels you're going to use for distribution. Like we were very lucky in that I knew a lot of people in VC before, and actually when we were looking at our breakdowns recently, it's kind of like 30-30-30 VC introductions, / founder referrals, content and community. And I think it's those 3 areas. but I spend a lot of my time thinking about distribution more than anything else. So yeah, if you're in the people and talent space and you want to break out by yourself, think about how you're actually going to get the work before you go and do the thing.
I think it's such valuable advice, and I think anyone that's been a founder will be there, roaring in the background, because it's the thing that doesn't get talked about is distribution. And there's a great example in our industry. Lee Harding's doing some great stuff on TikTok at the moment to start building an audience, which will then give him a place to do distribution. And I was fortunate to be at a conference in LA a few weeks ago listening to Mr. Beast, who's got the ultimate distribution in the world. And his new chocolate bars are doing $200 million a year in revenue. So that shows you how important distribution is. I mean, there's probably no one better in the world than him at distribution.
To finish off on that note, the sex chocolate guy on TikTok, who is absolutely killing it, is apparently getting close to Mr. Beast levels by just thinking about distribution first. There you go.
Yeah, absolutely. There really is. I've still held off the temptation to download TikTok, so I'm going to try and keep that going for as long as I can. But Matt, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. We're going to get you back on for round 2 if we like it or not, because there's still so much more we could talk about. But I really appreciate you coming on, and look forward to speaking again soon.
Pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Mark.